Hello, and welcome to another edition of Day Drinking with Kevin. I'm your host, Kevin McGuire. And today we go on the road with Day Drinking with Kevin for a winery profile. Today we're going to visit beautiful Barrewl Oak Winery in Delaplane, Virginia. We're going to talk to Brian Roeder, the owner of Barrewl Oak Winery, about what it was like to start up a winery in 2006 and how he's managed over the last year through the rough waters of COVID-19, along with sampling some great wines. I can't wait to go on the road with Day Drinking with Kevin. Hi, I'm here at Barrewl Oak Winery, and I've got my very good friend Brian Roeder here. He's the owner of Barrewl Oak Winery.
Correct.
And I thought it would be great to get a owner's perspective of what it's like to run a winery in Virginia. So Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure, really.
So you purchased the winery back in 2006.
Purchased the land,
Okay.
built the winery, planted the vineyard, started the business.
And how long was it before you actually got the tasting room and all of the facilities to start making money?
Yes, so we bought the land in 2006. I spent winter of 6 and 7 designing the business plan, the business model, working with my partner. And then we broke ground in July of 2007. We planted our first vines in April of 2007. And then we opened Memorial Day weekend of 2008.
Wow, fantastic. One of the things that I've always liked about Barrewl Oak is that it's a destination place and you feel warm and welcomed no matter who you are. You have the food trucks and the fire pizza, and now with COVID you have the Barrewl Oak bubbles and things. And so you've gone out of your way to make people feel at home and feel warm and comfortable here.
Well, that was the idea from the very beginning. I've said since almost the beginning that there are two types of wineries, two types of tasting rooms. One is just about the wine. It's almost like the experience is completely devoted to the product itself. It's just wonderful. I call that the chateau. The other is what we call the village. It's a sense of celebration that occurs where wine is present, and sometimes beer, oftentimes. And so the idea that Barrewl Oak could be either a chateau or the village was something that we discussed at length as we were preparing that business plan and what we wanted to be. And because of who we were, we wanted to be more like a place where people come to celebrate life and enjoy wine as part of that. Now, don't get me wrong. I've always said that you have to have both great wine wrapped in a great experience. So you can have great wine, but if it's a terrible experience, people aren't going to come back. And if it's a great experience with terrible wine, people aren't going to come back. So you really have to get both. But then, again, the question is, are you doing it so that people come in, they taste, then they buy and they leave? Or you do it so that people can come and spend time and relax and enjoy? Another key part of that is Barrewl Oak has always been a place where adults can bring their children and their dogs. And that's very important because when you think about it, if you're going to celebrate life, if you're going to celebrate a graduation or an engagement or even a birthday or anniversary, you don't want to have to leave half the family at home. And boy, the dog's part of the family and kids are definitely part of the family. So you want to be able to be all together. And because Barrewl Oak from day one welcomed dogs and children, we've been a place where people can celebrate. So it really is neat that you noticed that. Thank you.
Yeah, even to the point where there are dog bones right as you come in on the front door. And as a dog owner, I respect the fact that we can bring those members of our families to Barrewl Oak as well. But let's talk about the wine for a second.
Sure.
Because let's face it, our day drinkers out there love to talk about alcohol. And not only do you have this destination place, but you have award-winning wines as well.
Absolutely.
And and I understand that you were the first farm in Virginia to also have beer as well.
We were the first farm winery to also be able to use what at that time, about 5 years ago, was the new farm brewery licensing that had been created by the legislature. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, there were some really forward-looking wineries that had both wine and beer, but the beer was made under a commercial license and had to be served in a separate area. So we asked the ABC, after they passed the new law, we asked the ABC whether or not they would allow people to be able to enjoy the wine and the beer at the same table, and they said yes. So we were the first winery to be able to put that in place, and now we are actually technically, we call ourselves Barrewl Oak Winery and Farm Taphouse.
Okay.
And so we have here on site a brewery built down into the hillside, and we bring the beer right upstairs, and we have anywhere generally from 4 to 8 beers on tap at any given time.
Fantastic. I know when you're coming out to do a celebration or whatnot, there are going to be some people that maybe don't like wine and prefer beer, and
Exactly.
you're catering to everybody.
Well, for years, I'd have guests come through the door, generally the ladies, because about 65% of the wine business is, in terms of guests, is women.
Okay.
So they are the majority of guests that every winery generally has, and which we definitely have. So for years, mostly the women, sometimes the guys would say, hey, you know, my spouse would come with me, except they only drink beer, they don't drink wine.
Okay.
So as a result, for years, after hearing this over and over and over again, it was a goal, once it was possible, to add the brewery. So even though the brewery is a small part of the overall business that we have, it just adds an additional way to enjoy the day. The beers are also award-winning, and it also allows us to be able to give those women whose husbands want to stay home a way to get them here, right? You know, it makes me perhaps the most hated man in Northern Virginia, because the guys no longer can stay home under the excuse that they can't, you know, that they got to drink their beer and they don't want wine. Now, you know, the spouse gets to say, sorry, honey, they got beer too. So, you know, I'm sorry, guys, I really feel bad about that. But we try and make it worth your while with good beer and a great time when you're here.
That's fantastic. There's no question that come March of 2020, we experienced a downturn in business due to COVID-19.
Yes.
And how has COVID affected this industry and your business in particular, and how have you adapted?
Yes, yeah. COVID, of course, for the entire world has been a gut kick. It's no difference for the wine industry. You know, I know that it's been very challenging for a lot of my peers. And, you know, the wine business, contrary to popular opinion, isn't something you go into to get rich. Most of the people in this business, especially here in Virginia, have spent their lives with a dream which they then finally put in place when they open a winery. And it's a very, very challenging business to be in. So you throw on top of that COVID, right? And it's just made it incredibly challenging to make the ends meet for everybody, including a business like Barrewl Oak. So I actually woke up at 2 a.m. A year ago yesterday. And I thought, I'm gonna lose everything. I'm gonna lose my business. I'm gonna have to go personally bankrupt. And I started thinking about how I could try and prevent that from happening. And 5 days later, I sat down with our senior team and laid out a map of what I thought this looked like. Keep in mind, this is a year ago when this was just really beginning to take root. And much of that map is what we followed, and we've added on to it. So in our case, the end result is that we saw a significant cut in our revenue, but we also worked as a team to cut our overhead in ways that were unimaginable before COVID. And our senior team, even our staff, all took cuts. I stopped paying myself. We took extraordinary steps because we were all committed to having Barrewl Oak remain in spite of the challenges we faced. And it was the unknown that was, for all of us, one of the most difficult things. What does this mean? What's going to happen? And there were no answers. So we set out to try and plan for a worst case scenario, which primarily revolved around the winter, when we didn't know if our doors would be open or closed, working to try and get cash in the bank so that we had reserves to draw on. And I think that this is probably something that most business owners would be familiar with. And definitely, I think most of the winery owners who are out there. And, you know, here we are a year later, and we're in fairly good shape. And, you know, we're trying to get back to a sense of normal like everybody is. We're actually anticipating probably quite a few people coming through our doors starting over the next month as the weather warms up. I think everybody has a sense that it's time to get out. So really the question has been for us, how do we maintain quality of experience? Because the wine and the beer, we make them, we know how to do that. But how do we maintain the quality experience in a new environment in which we're protecting everybody's safety? You know, and people have different perceptions of what safety looks like. And with our guests, part of it has been, a big part has been messaging. How do you help set expectations for the people coming to Barrewl Oak where they understand what they're going to get, which is different from what it was before. And yet they understand also that what they're getting is still a quality experience. And some of that is obvious and some of that actually has to be explained. I've said almost from the beginning that our number one job is to take care of our team, because if we do that, we can take care of our guests. And so the focus has been on making sure that with COVID out there as a threat to not just our bottom line, but to the people who work here and to the people who are coming out here, we need to take every precaution that we can to protect everyone. As a business owner, I have an obligation for this business to be successful, pay its bills, keep people gainfully employed, but I also have an obligation, an ethical and moral one, to make sure that Barrewl Oak is in a place that is causing people to come here to be exposed in a way that is irresponsible in the way we're running the business. And that's always been a top focus for us as we do COVID. And we never had to worry about those kinds of things before. So it's been an extraordinary shift that has changed the way we do business, which we want to get back away from and get back to the old way. But for example, through the winter, we haven't been able to have children inside the winery because while we love having children here, that's what we're known as, in the winter when it's very cold on a weekend, if you have children who are not being watched and they're moving around and running around, there's a risk of exposure, which other people are very uncomfortable, with that scenario. So we had to make these guys are out here in the country, stink bugs. So we've had to take steps to try and account for this change, and it's been very challenging. It's one of the biggest challenges I've had in my life, but we're getting through it. Thanks for asking. I know that was a long answer.
Yeah, no, that's okay, because I know when we drove up today, you have the picnic tables all spread out in a safe manner, and now you have these gorgeous Barrewl Oak bubbles.
Yeah, the bubbles,
that people can come and rent, and they're in their little self-contained environment. And you've done so much to create the experience here. And one of the things I remember is coming here to hear music and things like that. And you're even having to adjust to that now as well.
We will have music starting in April, but through the winter, it's fascinating. I mean, you're trying to strike a balance between safety and experience and keeping the business afloat in a scenario in which we have a third of the tables inside that we had in the old days. So pre-COVID, through the winter on Fridays, we'd have a musician here playing because we had a pretty good idea that all these tables would be filled with people, or most of them would. Now when we have 20 tables and people aren't going out the way they used to, maybe I've got 5 or 10 tables. Well, that means I can't really afford to have a musician playing here on a Friday evening as much as I want to, right? So it's a balancing act. It's where so if you don't have a musician, what do you do for Friday? Well, I was talking earlier to you before we started about how I'm really in charge of, at the end of the day, marketing and branding for the business. And years ago, I came up with this idea of what we called TGI Sunsets, which is Friday evenings and Saturdays in the summer when we're open late. And then in the winter, we convert that over to game night. And we have games and everything. But that doesn't really work in the COVID day to have people coming in and using games that everybody's sharing. So this winter we did date night. The idea that it was a quiet place where you could go with your spouse, with your loved one, and just hang out and have a nice quiet time, which is very different than the old days where it was like, go out and have fun on a Friday. Now it's go out and have a quiet, safe evening. So, the bubbles are an extension of that. We have 8 of them. They each hold up to 7 people comfortably with nice lounge chairs and rugs and heaters and whatnot. And the idea was that as long as we really sanitize those environments, we recirculate the air with fans, we spray them down twice in the intervening period between people with sanitizer, we were creating a totally sanitary, safe environment for our guests. And not all guests want that, but some do. And we charge a reservation fee, but they get it all back in wine and beer. So you've got to try and think of where your guests are emotionally, psychologically, and then provide to them what they're looking for. So we have several choices. Outside, we have the picnic tables, first come, first seat. Inside we have reservations and you're sharing the space, and then outside we have the private sanitary sanctuaries of the bubbles.
Virginia offers kind of a unique environment for growing grapes.
Yes.
And is there a particular varietal that you think grows well in Virginia?
There's several actually.
Okay.
You know, the two grapes of Virginia, the two varietals of Virginia are Viognier and Petit Verdot.
Okay.
All right. Now, those two varietals grow really well in some areas and not as well in others. The Viognier, for example, does better down south than it does up here in the northern Piedmont area. The Petit Verdot and the Cabernet Franc, some would say the Cabernet Franc is the other wine of Virginia. They do fairly well all over.
Okay.
These, of course, are all grape varietals that are originally from France. And some of them were brought to the United States here in Virginia. Dennis Horton of Horton Cellars is the one that introduced Viognier to the United States. Before Dennis did that, you couldn't get the Viognier grape in the United States, the Viognier wine. So there's a lot of innovation in our industry with people like Dennis and others that has allowed us to establish varietals that typically you didn't see. The single varietal Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot, for example, historically the West Coast used those as blending grapes, right?
True.
As you know. And so Virginia really focused upon them as single varietal wines, and that's how we make them. We make them as single varietal Petit Verdot and Cabernet Franc because we think the variety really has its unique, wonderful flavor, distinct flavor, rather than as blenders going into a Cabernet Sauvignon or a Merlot to give it a little more punch, perhaps, right? So it's a very interesting business with all the things you can do when it comes to making the wine, all the different ways that you can blend and do that, and it all starts in the vineyard with the grapes that we're growing. Another very important grape in Virginia is Norton. As many people know, as I'm sure your listeners know, Norton's very important because it's from Virginia. And what a lot of people don't know, by the way, there's a book called The Wild Vine that's just a wonderful read.
Oh, okay.
And it's about the history of Norton. And it was domesticated and hybridized, I think, from a local vine as well as Cabernet Sauvignon by a gentleman named Dr. Daniel Norbert Norton back in 1833 in Richmond. And this gentleman brought those two grapes together. Nobody knows for sure, but that's what people think because he didn't write it down. And then over the decades, Norton became the most popular wine in America. And in the period leading up to Prohibition, Norton was the #1 selling wine in America. And Virginia was the #1 wine-making state in the Union. And that all ended with Prohibition when they ripped all the vines out and shut down all the wineries. So that's a very important grape. It's a very distinct, unique flavor. Some people call it foxy. Because what I tell people is that it's a wine that people both really like or really don't like. It's got a sweet and a sour aspect to it. Sweet tart. We call it sweet tart. It's got not a sour, but a tartness and a sweetness at the same time, which is very unique. Very unique in that wine.
Everybody in the wine business, to me, has a story of that moment in time where you said, I want to get into this business.
Yes.
What was that moment for you?
Well, with my business partner, I asked her what her dream was. She was in government affairs consulting, and the real question was, what do you want to do instead of that, right? Because, it was an okay job, but it wasn't really making her life as exciting as she was looking for. On the other hand, I've kind of followed my muse my whole life. I've been lucky that way. There've been a lot of car wrecks along the way, but dang, I was having fun driving it when it happened, So she shared with me, this was back in 2014, that it was her dream to grow grapes. And it turned out that when I was young, I had a list of things that I dreamt that I might be able to do. And because I grew up in California, and when I got into my late teens, early 20s, I was always going up to wine country in the summer. I looked pretty old for my age. I'd sip on the wines, and even though I wasn't yet 21, and I just had a love of that. And I was in the restaurant business and learning about wine and serving wine. So when she said she wanted to grow grapes, I thought, well, I've wanted to own a winery. So do you want to do that? And she agreed. And then it moved from just growing grapes to also making the wine. So at the end of the day, the business proposition was, you grow the grapes and make the wine, and I'll physically build the business, and I'll figure out a way to pay for it, and I will run it. And that was the deal we worked out years ago, and she's still making the wine.
I had always thought that owning a winery was just sitting out on the patio, drinking old bottles with good friends. That doesn't seem like that's what you do at all around here.
No, it's it's really something. I love the movies about living the dream, the wine movies. They're wonderful, and Steven Spurrier, who just died yesterday, that wonderful movie. I can't remember the name right now. It's on the tip of my tongue. Where he's leading up to the tasting in France that established California. It's just a wonderful, wonderful movie because it also shows that lifestyle that we romanticize. And about 3 or 4 times a year, I get to live that life.
Okay.
Up at the house, looking down over the winery and the vineyards, sit there with some friends, sip on some wine, have a nice meal. And boy, I tell you, I love it when that happens. But most of the time I'm sitting at my computer running spreadsheets or in meetings, and that's just the way it is, like any business, And the wine business is a very time-consuming, all-consuming business because we're actually running 5 businesses. We are farmers, we're manufacturers, and of a consumable luxury good, there are all kinds of rules having to do with the fact that you're putting our stuff inside of you. We are salespeople, marketers, wholesalers, and we also have to run the business that runs all those, and that's my job. So it's an incredibly complex and fascinating business to be in. And the cash flow is really messed up. You've got to spend a lot of money when you don't have it, and then you got a lot of money coming through the door to try and catch up. And it's been just an amazing experience, and I'm glad I did it. But it's just really very challenging for a lot of people to be in this business. Really, it's really quite a ride, that's for sure.
All right. Well, Brian, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today and to tell us all about the Barrewl Oak Winery. And thank you for being a passionate small business owner that has survived through all of this. And this summer, as our day drinkers come and visit Barrewl Oak, I hope you'll look Brian up and raise your glass to him and say thank you, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Cheers.
Cheers. Brian, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us and telling us all about Barrewl Oak Winery. I know if our day drinkers out there are ever in Delaplane, Virginia, they'll be sure to look you up and experience that hospitality that you and your staff offer. If you like this episode, please don't hesitate to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to Day Drinking with Kevin. If you'd like to do another winery profile, give me some suggestions by emailing me at daydrinkingwithkevin@gmail.com. And don't forget, in addition to these Monday videos, we also have our 2nd and 4th Friday of the month What's in My Glass contests and our how-to episodes that come on the 1st and 3rd Fridays of every month. So until then, thanks again, Brian at Barrewl Oak Winery, and I say, salute.